Waking Up is Not Enough. Flourishing in the Human Space, a podcast by Young-Eisendrath and Michael Berger. When you peek into the cosmic unity of existence and feel the love and inspiration of awakening, what happens next? Whether it's through meditation, spiritual practice, near-death experience, ingesting a mind-altering substance, or being born again, you don't get a map for improving your messy life. In this podcast, Young-Eisendrath and Michael Berger draw on expertise in science, psychology, adult development, psychedelics, NDEs, dreams, and Buddhist practice in conversations about compassion, resilience, responsibility, kindness, and development after awakening. You will learn how to chart a new path for flourishing in the human space, in which waking up is important, but not enough, and growing up is never finished. Co-hosts Young-Eisendrath and Michael Berger bring different kinds of expertise. Polly is an author, psychologist, Jungian analyst, longtime Zen practitioner, couple therapist, and founder of Dialogue Therapy and Real Dialogue. Michael Berger is an entrepreneur, an expert in psychedelics, a spiritual practitioner of Jewishness, a skeptic, a Real Dialogue specialist, and a filmmaker who is known for his documentary, Improbable Collapse, The Demolition of Our Republic. Polly and Mike will engage with each other and invite a wide array of guests who are accomplished scientists and seekers whose work lies beyond the hegemony of materialism.
So hi, Mike.
Hi, Polly. How are you?
Well, that's a big question. Let's just say I'm good enough. And it's a beautiful day here in Vermont. So it's lovely here right now. So I'm happy to be doing this conversation with you. And in many ways, I can't imagine doing it with anybody else, because who wants to talk about conflict avoidance and passive aggression and cancel culture? People don't talk about it. They do it, but they don't talk about it. So it's great to talk to you about this.
Same here. And actually, it's a timely topic for me right now because in the many roles that I play, like as a subdivision trustee, I seem to have endless opportunities for conflict.
Yes. Well, honestly, if you have a partner, you have grown children, or you're involved in any way with your neighborhood, I'd say you have many opportunities for conflict, because honestly, we are each in our own snow globe. And I can have conflict about something like whether I should buy a certain kind of apple that we also grow on the apple tree, where we never pick the apples, or rarely do we pick those apples, but they're always potential, so I shouldn't buy something that, anyway, that those kinds of conflicts can become really spirited quickly, even something very, very, sort of ordinary.
Yes, an ordinary conversation can go sideways by interpreting one glance, one word in a way where somebody takes offense, and then it escalates from there.
Yeah, yeah, unless they use the skill of real dialogue, which I do. I do use. I use it. I use it a lot. And just being able to say, well, I would like this, or I enjoy, or I will boil the apples, has been a great freedom, instead of saying, why don't you? Or don't you know? All these kinds of rhetorical things, or we should, you know. So I have learned a lot myself from using the skill, from also teaching people, other people, to use the skill, and then talking about subjectivity, just talking about what it means to be human. I know you and I are talking about awakening on this podcast, where we're talking about awakening not being enough.
Yeah, it's, one of the greatest challenges is if you're on some kind of path to change, to try to unlearn some of the culturally conditioned habits and ways of thinking or loops we get into, then the challenge comes with, how do you walk that way in the world? How do you bring it into your life in a culture that seems to oppose or conspire against anybody who is trying to shed some of that conditioning and thinking critically and speaking for themselves? It's fascinating to listen to conversations. Like when we go out to dinner, sometimes I'll overhear people speaking next to us. And when you listen to the way people express themselves to each other, especially, to their close friends and family, I can often hear people coming from a framework of somehow they're a victim of circumstance. They don't seem to have any agency in what's, quote, happening to them. And I find it fascinating that you hear it and we express it and we project that out into the world. And for the most part, it likely goes unchallenged in any conversation. For one, people seem to be quite fearful of how to handle disagreements or conflict in a tactful way.
Well, not even only in a tactful way, I think in any way at all. Many times when I eavesdrop on conversations in restaurants, I have no idea what people are talking about because each person says something and the other person responds, but often I don't hear any thread of understanding, um, an attempt to really answer questions, just like in that presidential debate. There wasn't even an attempt to answer the questions. Nobody was asking many questions that were actually questions. So I think that many people have the habit of just chirping to each other and they chirp along, and then eventually they'll tumble into feeling that the other person has wounded them, has humiliated them, or dismissed them. And then at that point, it's a limbic system reactivity. It's fight or flight usually. And so the actual use of words to talk back and forth is, in my mind, questionable in many situations that I'm in, whether people are using words in any way to speak to each other or listen to each other. But, I do want to get back to awakening, and I want to say how I think that the issue of conflict avoidance or calling out, both of which eliminate the other person or the other side. They completely eliminate. So there's no contact. How that attitude is really contradicted by whatever it is that people awaken to, because we awaken to some underlying unity. So, my own definition of awakening is the direct experience of the underlying unity of what I would call space time or this world cycle, the situation I live in, you know, that there's an underlying unity in which the subject and the object, that's me as the perceiver, what I'm perceiving, is absolutely unified. And that also is the case when I'm perceiving Mike Berger. You and I are unified. At some level, we're connecting when I'm perceiving you and interacting with you. And that kind of perception and interaction starts interuterine for humans because we come inside of someone else. We form, we develop inside of another person, and we can recognize her voice, the tone, and even to some extent the way the language is configured. We can recognize our mother's voice from roughly 4 months interuterine on, and we prefer that voice. And of course, also interuterine, we're recognizing mother's emotions. We're responding emotionally ourselves. So we're already doing a lot of communication with another. We're already unified. We're unified even though, and this is the part that's hard to figure out, we have our own perception. We're always perceiving that unity through our own snow globe. So it's paradoxical for us since we are, in a sense, always first person perceivers, but we also have direct experience of the unity. So to me, the direct experience of unity is accessible to us at any moment. It's always happening to us. It's just that we're not aware of it. And so sometimes we become aware of the unity, and sometimes we provoke that awareness by doing things like entering special meditative states. What are meditative states? They are simply ways of seeing and hearing and feeling things. They are not wizard states. They are states that are human. We can see and hear and feel in certain ways, in certain states of mind. I'm not going to go into those particulars. I myself really do like practicing what are called absorption states. Other people don't like that, but I like it because through those absorption states, I get direct experience of unity pretty quickly, or what seems to be quickly, to me at least.
How would you define an absorption state?
An absorption state is a state of mind in which one voluntarily drops what we could call the ego perspective, the default mode network. I don't know those terms. I don't like any of them, but that sense of being divided, subject and object divided. But in absorption states, you enter through this experience of equanimity. Equanimity is essentially not pushing or pulling on things, on any experience. It's allowing, opening, not pushing and pulling. And so with deep equanimity and some skill, I must say, in absorption states, I have to say that not everybody practices these things. I broke my arm and I could have it set without any anesthesia and I wasn't bothered. Not that I didn't have pain. I did have pain. And when I broke the arm, I had a couple of situations that happened that I was aware of. One is that when I went down and the wrist was kind of crushed down, a voice said, "You're okay." And so my thought was, I didn't break my arm. And then there was tremendous pain and shock and so on, which would have been a contraindication to my thought that I didn't break my arm, but I was hanging on to this other voice, the voice that said, "You're okay." Retrospectively, I realized the voice was not about breaking my arm. So once I gathered my own awareness, and I was rolling around on the ground going, "Ow, ow, ow," and my hand was kind of hanging off of my arm. Once I gathered my awareness and I gathered my concentration and I began to chant, I had access to this different state of mind. And by the time I arrived in the emergency room, I had enough access that I could say to the doctor, "Please don't give me any painkiller when you pull this arm into this temporary cast." They had to hang it up, kind of pull it and so on. And he said, "No, no, you won't be able to tolerate it." And I said, "Well, I can't tolerate painkillers because they make me sick." I mean, I was having to say this to him also to convince him, but I can tolerate pain. Please give me a try. And so he did. And, I had my eyes closed, so I didn't watch it. And I just entered into this state of tremendous equanimity. And it was all fine. It was just fine. And my awareness was aligned with that fineness. And I don't know how long it took him to do this, but I did have a witness. There was someone there with me, and I guess there was a period of time, like about 10 minutes or something. But the doctor did a couple of times ask me, because I think I must have looked strange to him, "Are you okay?" And I could say yes. So I had enough connection to the conventional kind of world. But so that's just like an extreme example. And I don't want people to think that I do these kinds of states of mind in order to be able to um, do what I think Christian Science people practice the same thing because they can do these kinds of things without being Buddhist. So I'd say there's a way to do that. But
I hear in what you're saying the ability to tune or focus your awareness. I think this is connected to this is very much connected very centrally to what we're talking about awakening. Our ability to tune or focus our awareness like a lens, I think it's not taught. It's not something that's even culturally acknowledged or accepted that we have that ability. So to the doctor, there are so few people who can come in and not have to take a pain med for them to set a bone that rarity of experiencing somebody who can do that has to be a little off-putting.
I was
And it,
grateful. I was grateful that that this doctor allowed me this because I could tell he was apprehensive about the whole deal,
right.
and yet he did allow it, and I was very grateful to him.
And I find that even the way you're phrasing it, that the doctor allowed it,
Mm,
that he had to accept that you had the capacity to tune away from the pain so you weren't going to scream and writhe in agony so he could do what he was doing. I'm sure it was meant to protect you, because to him, it probably was unfathomable that you'd be able to sit there while he's setting it in extreme pain. So our ability, and we hear stories about this frequently, like a child gets injured and all of a sudden a parent has either superhuman strength or they've been injured as well, but they're able to take care of their child, and only after they get through the crisis does their own pain or injury come into focus.
right.
So it shows this incredible ability that we have, and yet we walk around in a world that pretends we do not have those abilities, or that there's something extraordinary about people who do, because we so infrequently see demonstrations from it or tune into it. So if I'm sleepwalking, for lack of a better term, I'm not paying attention, maybe I am not introspective and I don't contemplate any of the deeper questions about why I'm here, then things appear to be a certain way. And the way those things appear to us become what we see habitually.
Yes, exactly. Because actually, if you're not training your mind a certain way, you're training it some other way. And so, years ago, I heard the Dalai Lama say, if you're not training your mind with mindfulness, you're training your mind with anxiety. So your mind gets better and better at anxiety. Your mind gets better and better at, let's say, telling yourself internal stories about how you've been cheated or how you've been hurt or how you've been harmed. So you get better at that. You're getting better at whatever you're practicing. Your mind is getting better at it. You may be practicing stories that create depression, practicing stories to yourself that create anxiety, or you're practicing a certain kind of freedom where you recognize that there's no split between you and what you call your body, that is your awareness, and what you call your body, which is really just another state of awareness. But anyway, I want to get back to this issue of awakening just because. So I think all methods, whether they're meditative or they're substance oriented, they're accidents or shock oriented, they're grace oriented through being born again or near death experience, as we've pointed out otherwise in the podcast. All of those methods can get us to this state in which we recognize, we're aware of the unity and the connection between subject and object, which can be a connection between self and other human. And we've had that from our interuterine life. We know that we are connected. So let's take that as an insight, that we have this insight into our connection and the undivided oneness of a part of our experience. So I'm not going to go into the technicalities about, developing self-awareness and so on, which we've mentioned many times. 18 to 24 months, we start to form a sense that we're inside of the body and the world is out there. And then we do a lot with that, But the main thing that we do is we create a sense of, I'm over here, you are over there. And if you don't do what I want and need, well, I might kill you. I might eliminate you. I might vanquish you, or in a more sort of ordinary way, I might ignore you. Just ignore you. Just ignore anything you're saying. And so when we do that, when we try to eliminate the other person's subjectivity, the other person's perspective, the other person's pain, vulnerability, insight, wisdom, we're going against the awakened mind.
And we're invalidating their basic humanness, their humanity, seeing that common connection. When I am activated or am triggered by something I see or something I hear or something somebody says, it's as if I regress into a self-protective mode and then lash out if I'm not aware as it's happening. And it's only in that, as you say, in creating that space in order to respond rather than to react, that in one sense, that I become more fully human in slowing down and trying to respond. It's the difference between a conditioned reflex, an automated way of reacting to whatever arises in our field of perception, as opposed to when I'm feeling connected to something larger than myself. It seems that I have much more space and time in which to respond. I don't know. I don't really know how to express this in any other way. Yeah, I think of some of the scenes in movies where things are happening so fast, but in the film, everything's in slow motion while it's
Right.
happening very fast, right? And I think that's very similar to what happens to these automated responses in developing this mindfulness, this ability to tune our awareness. It's as if we can slow down these very high impact, very, very quick experiences. It The same thing happens if you've ever been unlucky enough to be in a car accident. As it's happening and unfolding, it seems to happen in slow motion. There seems to be this expansion of time. Everything, even though I can't control what's going on, at times I become almost aware of moment to moment arising as I'm spinning out of control.
So yes, I want to stop you there just because. So again, getting back to awakening, awakening shows us through our direct experience that time and space, subject and object, that is matter and body, don't exist in the way that we typically believe they exist. They are not separated out. They are not essentially enclosed in different, oh, I don't know, capsules. Like people say, my body does this, my body does that. It's not like that. It's like you're perceiving something that you're calling your body. Your body is an aspect of your perception. Then you can become aware of your perception because you're a human. And then you can slow down your perception, and then time and space slow down. And you can do that intentionally because you are human. If you were any other kind of mammal, you do not have the freedom to direct your awareness to your awareness. You do not, as Piaget calls it, operate on your mental experience. You do not operate on it. Humans are able to stop themselves in mid action because they're aware that they don't want to hurt somebody. I can stop myself even. I might not be effective. I can try to brake the car if I see an animal coming out in front of me. If my dog sees another animal in our yard, she can't stop herself from going after that animal. She does not have awareness of what she is doing. She's doing it instinctually. So to recognize that humans have essentially, I would say, an instinct for awareness of their awareness. We are designed so that we become aware how we see and hear and feel. We also then, unfortunately, believe that we understand other people's ways of seeing, hearing, and feeling without asking them, and that we know other people's intentions without talking to them. We assume that we know because we have a certain kind of experience. So, as humans, on one hand, we have this tremendous freedom, ability, intelligence to be aware of our awareness. And I would say no AI will ever do that, ever, ever, because that awareness is based on our emotional development. It is not a cognitive issue, it's emotional. But we do have this, and we can do something that no other mammal can do. On the other hand, from that very gift, we make a huge mistake. And that mistake is we believe we can read other people's minds, other people's intentions, other people's life histories without talking to them about it. And so consequently, humans are really, they are so posed to destroy themselves, as the Terminator says in Terminator 2. It's our nature for us to destroy ourselves as well as to kill in large number other kinds of beings, but we will kill humans in large numbers as well, because we believe that we have to do that because they're bad. They're doing the bad things. They are doing the wrong things. They are like animals. They are not allowed to live. So, this very thing that allows us to be aware of our awareness, that creates this sense of self reference, that I can operate on my own thoughts and feelings, also gives me the sense that I can know yours, that I know what you were thinking. If I've had this experience with the apples, then probably you're having it too, because you're human like me. Doesn't that mean that you should like the apples in the way I like the apples? And of course, all of our experiences are unique, they're individual, they're constrained by our own subjectivity. It is not possible for us to escape a first person experience. So even our awakenings are first person. So I awaken, as you've pointed out many times, Mike, if I take some kind of substance like MDMA, the experience I have is not because of the MDMA, it's because of me. I'm having an MDMA experience. Mike is having a different one. That's true also for marijuana. So it makes these kinds of substances very difficult to regulate, because the individuality in experience of these substances is kind of wildly, wildly unique. But even taking an aspirin, when I take an aspirin and you take an aspirin, we're experiencing something different, because we're not experiencing the aspirin, we're experiencing our own perception of, experience of the aspirin. So, I'm kind of getting around here to this idea that when I awaken, when you awaken, in general, when people awaken, what people like to talk about is the unity. They talk about, oh, I could feel the love. I could feel the sense of connection. Oh, that was so amazing, because otherwise I get trapped in my head, or whatever people say. But feeling that experience, that first person direct awareness of the unity, it needs to translate into relating to human beings, or it will become, unfortunately, sadly, another piece of narcissism for humans. Because if you don't translate it, then you'll tend to take it on board. Like, I had this special experience, and I want to tell you about how to have it, because I'd love for you to have it too. Not recognizing that maybe the other person has already had one or doesn't want one right now, whatever it is. It's more or less assumed that because I had this special thing, I can now tell you about it. And if you don't want to do that, then there must be something wrong with you, stupid person. So maybe I won't talk to you, neighbor, anymore, because you're not interested in my psilocybin experience, or my ayahuasca experience, or whatever it is. So it's very easy to take the awakening into a narcissism. It's much harder to take it into treating other people as though they're part of you, as though they deserve the same kind of respect, interest as you do. Now, that doesn't mean you agree with other people. It just means that you recognize when you're with them, you're not separated from them.
That's easier said than done on so many different levels. And I think this is a good entree into speaking about how to carry awakening into the current cultural climate. You know, on so many levels, I think about some of, like, for example, I don't remember which episode it was when you had pointed out that, there's no history beyond maybe the last 50 years where people referred to their brain as opposed to their self. So much a byproduct of how deeply ingrained this materialist outlook on the world. The implication or the underlying assumption there is that, again, that it's not consciousness, that I'm my brain, I'm this physical lump in my head. And it denies the reality, I guess from my perspective, denies the reality of of what and who we are.
I want to add here just that the pharmaceutical companies were really good at marketing my brain
Oh, of
because
course. Well,
they were going to get the thing to heal your brain, which would heal your suffering. And that was the 90s, the decade of the brain. And they promoted the SSRIs, the antidepressants, as healing your brain disease. Now, of course, in the 2000s, that's over. That is over because it didn't work. And now they've had to admit it didn't work, but they move right on.
on the corresponding side to that, what were the magic pills supposed to cure? All
The
right.
depression, largely, that
Pretty much any
anxiety.
symptom of our culturally conditioned social life that denies our individuality, that pushes us towards conformity and towards fitting in. So we have these opposing forces within us. We also live at a time where people are able to express themselves and be themselves more fully than in any other time in history. There's always this, I like to bring up irony and paradox, but the paradox that those same people who are able to be more fully themselves publicly than ever before seem to be the major driving force behind shutting down anybody who speaks anything that contradicts the way they want the world to look. So if I hold an opposing opinion, or if, for example, I am not comfortable using a plural pronoun for a single individual because I feel like I'm being asked to speak to a schizophrenic when I'm talking to somebody and they want me to call them a they, like I don't have an issue with referring to you by your name. I do have an issue, though, with me being programmed what words or how I'm allowed to think about my experience of others.
Mm.
So I fully support people being able to be as fully themselves as they have the capacity to be. The distinction I would make in this time of why this is so challenging a time to live through is because our culture has become so firmly divided in one sense. On one side, we have the neophobes. These are the people who are afraid of any change or anything new that doesn't look like it did when I was first formed. Not to go on a generational hunt, but I know most people my age and older, Gen X and boomers, have a certain view of young people's reality. And I'm not sure how many of us are able to comprehend the challenges they face that we've never had to face as we were coming of age.
So
Between,
I want to just, I don't want to
sure,
go too far afield here. I'd never heard the term neophobe. That's an interesting new term. But where I want to kind of go is on the issue that you are raising that I'm understanding this way, that the very folks who are, let's say, celebrating diversity, uniqueness, wanting to express this kind of uniqueness often are shutting down other people who want to express their particular approach to things, as it seems very ironic that people who talk about hate speech and how hate speech, with quotes around it, should not be allowed, are assuming that other people are hating things. And so it's like a hall of mirrors. Their own hatred gets imposed on other people, and then other people are not allowed to speak to them, so that those people, the original people who are ruling out the hate speech, can go on with their hatred because they never have to hear from the other side. So, college students who wouldn't allow, for example, Charles Murray to speak at Middlebury College because they hated what he wrote in the Bell Curve, even though most of them had not read the book. They didn't allow him to speak, so they never heard from him, so they could go on hating him. And so there's this irony in this kind of hall of mirrors thing where certain people shut down other people. They will not allow them to speak. They will do many, many things, leave the room or click their fingers or clap their hands or something just to stop somebody from speaking. Because the idea here is that I guess the listeners cannot tolerate, their ears cannot tolerate the sound of these other voices speaking. Their ears cannot allow for other people to speak differently. That seems to be that there's a kind of weird rule of thumb, like my ears can't take this. Okay, then how about working with your ears? Rather than shutting somebody else down. So I kind of want to move into that conflict avoidance and canceling that come out from this. But go ahead.
Oh, just what came to mind is the contrast between the social conformity of the 50s. And it wasn't that everybody conformed, but on the surface, it had appeared as if most people conformed. Those who didn't were living lives underground. They were invisible to the mass culture. But now we have this inversion that the people who have an ability now to express themselves and be fully out in culture in a way that they couldn't before are imposing a different form of conformity on those who aren't as, quote, out or enlightened as they believe they are. And so, in hearing what you were describing, these varying groups have seem to have lost their ability to be curious. I, I cannot I cannot get my head around college students not having any curiosity to hear opposing ideas. I mean, the whole idea in the 60s and 70s of going to a liberal arts university was to be exposed to all kinds of ideas before you, quote, grow up and go out into the world. That these settings, these institutions are no longer providing these different perspectives because it appears that the students themselves are so locked into conforming to a new reality that they see in some way as superior to what came before. They're unable to see that they're imposing a similar kind of fascistic conformity. The conformity to be a nonconformist is still conformity. It just
Yes,
looks different.
it is. And I think that here I would say I want to take a step back because, again, in this human framework, we have all of us this capacity to be aware of ourselves. What we do with that and how often we use it and how we use it and so on um, is a result of, I guess, our own desires and our own experiences and what we've learned, etc. One thing that I know from practicing a lot of meditation, a lot of Zen meditation, this idea of a don't know mind, that the mind that we can cultivate, there can be a mind that's open to experience. So I break my arm. That's a painful experience. If my mind is open to that, I can tolerate it. I can tolerate the physical sensations. If you speak to me about something that I object to, I can tolerate it. I can tolerate the sensations. I can allow my ears to hear you speaking, even if my solar plexus is grinding. And I can then, because I'm human, I can reflect back to you how I'm understanding your point of view. And I say that that takes some skill. I claim, because I teach real dialogue, and I know how hard it is to speak for oneself and to listen when someone else is saying something that fundamentally seems to me to be, for example, morally wrong. When something gets into the moral and principled side of things, I get very aggravated. But, sometimes people say to me things that I just don't believe about how important it is to not eat gluten or something like that. So that's just an irritation. In all of those situations, I can work with my own awareness. I can train my ears. I can train my ears to hear out to what the other person is saying instead of listening to me talk to myself. And then I can slow down and say back. So I'm understanding that blah, blah, blah. And blah, blah, blah there is very important. Where this backs up to awakening is that I recognize that if I'm in the room with Mike Berger or I'm on the Zoom with Mike Berger, I'm not just Polly. I'm Polly and Mike. I need to get involved there. I need to stay open because I may know some things as Polly, but Mike knows a lot also, and I want to tap into that. So if I'm in the room with somebody that I really disagree with, or I'm on the Zoom, or I'm in the, I want to take the moment to recognize I'm a part of that person right now. We're rising together. And this is don't know mind. This is I don't know. I don't know where this is going to go. I would like to follow it. And to me, this is using awakening in the present moment with another person. The point at which I say, I'm not interested, I'm out of here, or shut up, you're a fucking loser. I don't say those things, but I thought I'd say it there. The moment that I say that, I'm not working from the awakened mind. I am denying everything I might have experienced through the direct awareness. Now, I want to talk about conflict avoidance here just because I live in the state of Vermont. It's practically a state bird or something, conflict avoidance. It's like a requirement in Vermont, and it is somewhat in Canada also, not to have the conflict. So people, even when they stop at a stop sign, they'll linger there for the other person to go through the stop sign because they don't want to get into a conflict. They'd rather just sit there at the stop sign. So it's very confusing sometimes because you think, well, that person was sitting there before I came to the stop sign, and now they keep sitting there and waiting for me to go. And, so there's this sort of withholding of their, let's say, engagement or activity. They withhold it instead of bringing it forth, even at the stop sign. So many times in Vermont, I am a part of organizations, or I go to be a part of something I want to be a part of right now, of facilitating difficult conversations about what's going on in the war in Israel. I want to facilitate. I want to hear both sides. I want to hear people who disagree because I love to hear it. I learn so much. I can facilitate. I volunteer to facilitate difficult conversations at churches, uh, in universities. I have practically begged people to allow me to facilitate, but they don't want the conflict. They avoid the conflict. I had even one man say, I avoid all conflicts. I am not going to invite you to facilitate a conflict. And so, in my view, that man is saying, I don't want to learn from other people who disagree with me. I don't want to participate in their subjectivity. I want to rule them out. And at a very, let's say, extreme level, it would be like, I'd like you to go away. I'd like you to be dead. I'd like you to be out of here. I don't want you in my family. I don't want you in my neighborhood. It is so wrong and so against this awakened mind.
So the resistance to even having a discussion or a dialogue with somebody who believes differently, that when I tune in, I can feel this palpable fear in the other person, as if they are on the line. I believe part of this, at least from my perspective, I see it as a mistaken sense of identity, as if I'm this unchanging, fixed, solid entity that has an unchanging essence at its core. I can connect this to this notion of this old worldview that appears to be dying, the materialist worldview that says I'm this solid sense of self. The implications of Michael Lewis's work on that becoming a self between 18 and 24 months, there's this wondrous process that in the earliest parts of our lives, we're becoming this entity that appears to be real and solid. And then once we mature, some of us may spend the rest of our lives trying to take it apart to find out what's left when you remove what you've been conditioned into. And this seems to come into play in this conversation with people who have become so uncomfortable hearing opposing ideas. And you mentioned earlier this automated fight or flight response. It seems to me this has become a much more prevalent reaction to engaging in conversations with strangers, that people seem to get triggered even just thinking about the idea of engaging in dialogue. And I think about certain friends I have from other generations
who, when I call them and they answer the phone, they tell me repeatedly, you're the only person I answer the phone for. I don't ever talk on the phone, which to me, I don't understand that at all, as you may imagine, Polly. I like to talk. And I do a lot of talking on the phone, and I find it's an entirely different experience than looking at an email or a text. It's just cold compared to the richness and nuance of inflection and hearing the way somebody speaks. And so, when did it become so difficult? How did we lose this ability? It's not that we were ever good at it. I mean, you go back 60 years ago, the country was torn apart in a way not unlike now, where there were really quite extreme views of who and what America was supposed to be.
Back then, there was a free speech movement. And the idea was at least to advocate that people could speak freely about what they disagreed about. Now, back then, there was a lot of fighting, there was a lot of rage. However, there was the movement towards speaking freely. I think if it continued, it might have become more mindful. I mean, there is a way to speak freely and not damage yourself or the other person. There's a way to speak freely and be interested in both what you're saying and what the other person is saying. I think we might have moved in that direction, but somehow I believe that what you're saying about materialism has played a role. I think the role of the idea of the decade of the brain, that we are our brains, that somehow there's something in us that is the reason we're conscious, and that brain can only take so much jarring from somebody else's ideas, that I have to protect my brain. My brain feels like it's going to explode. I've heard people say that. I cannot imagine what that's describing, but I've heard that kind of thing. And I do think that plays a role in where we are right now, when I find people that are friends of mine, people who are associates, are very reluctant to even allow a facilitated, structured conversation about two sides of important issues to occur in their environment, even if those issues are extremely important to their community and are creating schisms, fragmentation, estrangement in the community. That the fear of hearing both sides is greater than the fear of estrangement, schism, fragmentation. In other words, losing relationships, losing community, losing insight into something new, that there's a greater fear. And I think it is in some ways the idea, and I see this in younger people, that only one side is right, and I'm on the right side, and my brain can't stand it to hear the other side, because my brain hurts then. And then, it's this idea of my brain is really, to me, a ridiculous idea, that it was put in place by a marketing campaign by the pharmaceutical companies. That tremendously bothers me. But I think you're correct that there's something about the materialism right now, plus the ideas of cancel culture. And so we were talking about conflict avoidance, but cancel culture came on board here right around the Me Too movement, maybe. I think so. I'm not sure. But at some point, groups of people decided that they could ruin somebody's reputation, that they could publicly attack a person or a group of people that they had not spoken to, that they could assume that they know the motivations, that they know the history by reading facts and not talking to the person. To me, that began the process, and this is maybe taking a big leap here, that ends us up with believing that we know what Vladimir Putin is feeling and thinking, even though we haven't listened to his speeches or read what he's written. I mean, I now have listened to his speeches and I have read what he has written, and I find him to be an incredibly intelligent, thoughtful, and relatively restrained person who also experiences and ideas that I totally disagree with. I mean, I wouldn't be Vladimir Putin if I had a chance to be, as far as I know, but I also respect him and I can see him as a world leader carrying a certain kind of dignity only because I have actually listened to him and read him. Now, I have many friends who make a lot of attributions about him who haven't read or listened to anything, nor have they been to Russia or anything else. So, again, the idea here is this sense that listening to both sides or allowing for opposed conversations to happen, that itself is harmful to people, hurts their brains, hurts their ears. That to me is new. And I feel like you do. It is dangerous, very dangerous, because it cuts off a part of our own humanity. We cannot exist with just one-sidedness. That cuts us off from wisdom.
Well, that was a big chunk. So I have so many thoughts connected to what you just said. So I think back to when the media was owned by more than 6 companies and they had something called a fairness doctrine, where whenever you aired any issue, you gave equal time to the opposing side. You didn't try to tell people what to think. You trusted your audience to figure it out for themselves and to think critically. You presented them with both sides of an issue. And as Americans, we would discuss this with family and friends. So, how did free speech become hate speech? I mean, when did this happen where that ability and that right? I'm shocked that I don't hear many people yelling about why a company like Facebook or X gets to determine who has First Amendment rights. And the government has passed laws that prevent you and I or anybody from suing these social media companies to hold them accountable. So they've been given a right, they've been granted a right that used to be reserved to the state. Now it's a corporate right to determine, cancel, shut down, punish anybody who speaks freely about an issue that people with more power do not want others to hear expressed. The notion that my brain hurts, I believe, is related to the vast amount of information we are now encountering every day, the amount of propaganda, just what we are exposed to. Like, I can't get into the mindset of somebody who, let's say, they came of age after the turn of the century. They've been living in a digitally connected network world where you can get away without having any interpersonal conflict, any discussions with a human. You can push a button and have a drone drop off your food and your packages. You can have people deliver your meals, your clothing, everything you need. You may never have to leave your apartment. And there are some people who seem to experience anxiety at such a level that they choose not to engage. Even simple interactions seem to be painful for them or cause anxiety.
So let me just stop there to say that you're now introducing another level, which I don't know if we can comprehend in this conversation, that media and journalism have changed tremendously since the free speech movement, for example. And so now we have what we call media, we call journalism, which is something that would have been unthinkable to me when I was young, which is a digital reality. I do think it requires almost a second conversation to talk about how awakening intersects with digital reality and whether it's possible to have an awakened mind if one does not interact with other humans. I would say it's not possible because we come into the world inside of a human. We are dyadic from the beginning. And if people cut off that sense of connection to other people, they're very much at risk for severe mental illness. That may be happening to people, I don't know. But I mean, it may be happening to people who do isolate themselves in their homes or apartments. I don't know because they don't come to see me in therapy, and I'm not in touch with them. But I think that recognizing that AI, digital information, any kind of machine information cannot substitute for human contact is a very primary awakened perspective, because it is recognition that being human means contact with another human. And you cannot be awake as a human without contact with another human. And that goes throughout time and space and all spiritual teachings. Even if you're in a cave in the Himalayas, you're in contact with your teacher because they could make contact outside of calling you up on a phone. They make contact parapsychologically or whatever you want to call it. It's direct transmission of mental content to a person across so-called time and space. So the isolation from other humans is inherently dangerous.
Yes, and recent studies on anxiety and mental illness show an enormous increase in the last 20 years. And most recently, the largest increase seems to be in, I'm going to get in trouble, but it's a study. I didn't do the study or author it. In women 25 and under
Oh,
seem to be having the most challenging time right now. And I assume, I'll make my assumption explicit, I assume this has to do with the competing and conflicting messages they get about who they are. When you have the outcome of the women's liberation movement, and then you meet that with cancel culture and everything that's going on, this has to be an incredibly challenging social environment to navigate. And I
well,
can't help but,
because you're so afraid of being canceled if you think differently from someone else. And also, if there's anxiety about who should be eliminated on the dating scene, then there's constant anxiety about who you can be in contact with, who's not going to cancel you and is not going to abuse you. And so,
and
yeah.
and more than any other time in history, when you went to school as a young person 30 or 40 years ago, the only people you compared yourself to were your peers. Now, with internet culture and social media, you're comparing your body type to everyone around the world in the most idealized forms. So there's even this more extreme self-deprecation. If
Well,
you're,
those aren't people either. Those are CGI or whatever. I mean,
well,
the
but
things that are out there are not really people's body types, but
but even
images.
even even if you look at who our culture glorifies for who they are, their body type, this ideal image, whether male, female, this is part of it. And there's a corresponding dissolution of what we used to call the nuclear family, unless you were President Bush, then it was the nuclear family, where that interpersonal relationship and connection in our own households has devolved. I mean, when I go out to eat in restaurants and I've seen families sitting at a table together and each person is looking at their device. So I want to go back to something from a little bit earlier. One enormous difference is in terms of the information media landscape. When we only had 3 or 4 choices, we all shared a relatively uniform media landscape. We all shared a certain cultural context, which now anyone can seemingly choose any reality they want to inhabit. If you're an Asian transsexual woman, you can find your others. You can find other people who look and
You're talking
think
about, though, you're talking about in a digital world. These
in a
are
digital
not actual
world.
people. Sometimes you might be in contact with people through the digital world. But even when for example, this is a loose connection here, but I supervise people on Zoom. And sometimes when I'm supervising, I haven't seen the person in person. And then eventually I'll meet them because I'll take them out to dinner or something. Tend to be residents in psychiatry. It's amazing how different they look when I meet them in person. And I've looked at them supposedly live on Zoom, but I haven't been in the room with them. So when you talk about idealized images, when you talk about images that are on the screen, all of these things are not the same thing as relating to a human being in the room, being able to pick up the warmth of their body, the smell of them, as well as the transmission. So again, spiritual paths that are very developed have mind-to-mind transmission. There's a certain amount of transmission happening person to person. It's hard to pick it up on Zoom, much easier in the room. We miss many, many things when we're on screens. And again, I know we're going to need to wrap this up soon, so I want to bring this back to conflict avoidance and cancel culture, just, in the sense of eliminating another person or the other side. So you're never in contact with them. Like conflict avoidance, basically what happens, and this unfortunately happens with women leaders, I am going to say in a way that I have seen regularly, women bosses, women managers, and working on all female teams, I have myself noticed and seen again and again the avoidance of direct conflict, and then a huge amount of ruining reputation behind someone's back. So that instead of having direct person to person, I see it this way, how about you? So I'm understanding that you blah, blah, blah. What happens is that women, and maybe men participate in this, but I've heard it more from women, will speak about the person in gossip behind their back, ruin the reputation of someone they disagree with, sometimes get them canceled completely or even lose their job by bringing in parts and snippets of conversations that have been recorded, whatever, whatever. But the idea is that I am free to do what I want to do as long as I don't have direct conflict with you. So I'll talk about you behind your back. That is extremely detrimental in women's teams, in their groups, of course, in their also their friend groups. So I do find there's a young female, but also older female tendency to avoid conflict, fear of saying directly, I like this, I don't like this, I don't agree with you, I want it this way, all of which are I statements. They're not attacks on the other person. I can say, I like it, I don't like it, I disagree with you, I prefer this or that, without attacking you. So I can have conflict with you without diminishing you. I can also have conflict with you and be able to hear what your side is and then review it back to you. Did I hear it correctly? Remain curious through that. And in that way, I can get through our differences and learn something. If I am going to avoid the conflict, ruin you behind your back, I am creating so many problems there, so many problems for myself and my community, and I'm not learning. And I feel like cancel culture does that kind of on steroids. It actually, people permit themselves, and again, this may have been a Me Too predilection from the beginning, permit themselves to attack other people without talking to those people, and permit themselves to assume they know what others are thinking without ever talking to them. And so I want to say in both of these cases, these are non-awakened perspectives. They do not fit with the awakened mind. They do not fit with when you and I are on the same team, you and I are together as one unit. And so why would I speak about you badly behind your back and not talk to you directly when I know that your welfare will also be my welfare? Your long-term, let's say, ability to thrive in life will affect me. And so if I have a more awakened mind, I will bring my conflict directly to you. I will treat you with respect because I recognize I need you. You're part of my team. You're part of my family. You're part of my neighborhood. I need you. I am not going to ruin you behind your back because that ruins me. I am not going to cancel you without understanding because that cancels me. So that's where I wanted to make sure that I fitted in this overall framework of how the awakened mind is actually not being practiced by people who do conflict avoidance, who may see themselves as very nice people because they never enter into the conflict, or cancel culture, who may see themselves as very righteous people because they know the right side. Both of those go against the awakened mind.
It may be a good time to bring in stage development theory. As I'm hearing what you're saying, I'm listening to what you're saying, I can't help but hear it through that perspective that if you're in conformity or conscientious conformity, it doesn't leave room for that awakened mind.
Mm.
You're at the level of the ocean you're swimming in. Generationally, if you surround yourself with what you pay attention to. So if you engage, for example, we haven't brought in any of the notions or applied some of what Marshall McLuhan had been warning us about, that understanding the nuance of what he said about the medium is the message. I don't know that we fully have grasped what he was saying and how that's playing out in this conversation. So if you're in the conformity or conscientious conformity stage, you're not going to be able to hear the curiosity of somebody who may be more comfortable or better able to tolerate hearing opposing views. And I believe so much of this comes down to taking it personally and feeling that I'm at stake. I'm being attacked when I'm exposed to an idea that I may find reprehensible or that I disagree with. It challenges my conformist sense of self. It endangers my ability to survive in my in group. Even the ability or the curiosity to hear that opposing view, I may find it so threatening that I have to cancel you. I have to shut you out. And in doing so, there's almost an unconscious acknowledgement that there's some truth in what you're saying that I refuse to acknowledge. It goes beyond like the difference between the free speech and hate speech. The country was very divided during the Vietnam War. The country was very divided in very similar proportions to now. You know, America, love it or leave it, versus peace, freedom, and love. At least that was the way it was portrayed historically now. And yet at the time, those two sides seemed much better equipped to allow people to express themselves because that's one of our founding principles from the Bill of Rights. This goes back a long way in history, but the ability, what set our nation apart is freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom to worship in any way you choose. And the loss of those freedoms based on this cultural canceling. And again, I have to go back to young people and especially college institutions, not only shutting down free speech, but criminalizing speech of people who hold opposing views, such that the heads of these institutions have had to resign for not controlling the students' free speech, destroying their possible future by arresting them and prosecuting them when they're expressing legitimate political views.
So,
As
I think that I I agree with you about all of this, and I think that the stage theory model is important to return to. And we're about to wrap up this particular podcast, but the reason that it's so important is if you go back to our earlier podcast when we started talking about stage theory, I know that I used Osama bin Laden as an example of somebody that is awake, was awakened, had an awakening experience. You could see by the way he walked and talked and so on. But he was awakened at probably a pre-conformist perspective. And so he was awakened and decided that he needed to kill the infidels because he was awakened to the idea that he knew the truth. And then that became his dedication. And I think that people who are at the conscientious level, who are just beyond conformity, sometimes they feel that they are awakened to something like the right way to reach peace or something like that. I mean, they have the idea that their side is right, and they can be captured as completely as a preconformist into the idea that only their side should exist, which then obviously means that they protect themselves and defend themselves as though they were preconformist. They don't know how to deal with the complexity of different points of view or to feel into experiences that are really different from their own.
And when my identity seems to be on the line, because what I'm hearing, I take as a personal attack on who I am or what I stand for, or that I know I'm in the right, there's also the possibility of regressing to an earlier stage, like preconformist, where the right thing for me to do then is to wipe out the other side because the other side is wrong. And the other side is a threat to my survival. It's not just a threat to my ego or my brain or what I think, but it's, in having the conversation, there may be some listeners, when they hear you talking about Vladimir Putin, they may interpret what you're saying as if you're approving of maybe who he is, where you use the word dignity. And there are some people who might find that reprehensible to use that word with the name Vladimir Putin, because in their minds, they know he's the evildoer, to use some other people's terminology of, you're either with us or against us. And that's kind of the circle the wagons mentality when I'm feeling that I'm under attack or my identity is threatened by an idea. Somehow that idea is connected directly with who I am. And now anybody holding the opposing idea, not only can I have very little curiosity to want to walk in their shoes, so we come back to empathy, this inability to see the commonness, the common humanity that we share, the oneness, right, from the
And
awakened state.
the connection of the awakened state. And so, I think that the reason that I particularly wanted to have this conversation is that if anyone is interested in the awakened mind, in producing it through meditation, psychedelics, other kinds of spiritual experiences, or has had the experience through near-death experience, if you're interested in developing that, it's very important to realize that having respectful conflict with people that we disagree with, that is the enlightened mind. That's the human consciousness working for the bigger purpose of transforming consciousness in general, because our differences are what allow us to see things from many different angles. And that is what really makes humans different from any other mammals that are here, any of the other insects that are here. We have certain kinds of capacities. And if we work against them and we feel that we're furthering enlightenment, that's a mistake. We're not. We have to be able to work with the differences. We have to take them forward in order to further that, let's say, privilege that we have to be human at a period of time when awakening is also offered in a larger way.
One final thought, which is returning to a sense of humility about what I know. And when I hear or listen, applying the rules of applying real dialogue, the practice of bringing that into my everyday life has helped me navigate so many difficult circumstances, difficult people. And it's difficult, it's challenging, it's not easy. If it were easy, you wouldn't be able to turn enough people away. It's not easy. That should be for any of our listeners. The challenge is, can you bring this into your everyday reality and apply it? It makes a difference. It will change your relationships. It's changed my relationships. It's changed my life. I have more friends now at 59 than I've ever had in my life. And I'm an introvert, and I'm finding myself the people who've come into my life cannot be more different from each other and more different from me. And I'm really enjoying hearing very different perspectives. There's so much that I learn about myself, about them, and about how to create a world that works for more of us, that gives us a social support line. If anything, in these times now more than ever, perhaps in our lifetime, Polly, I believe that it's these real world human connections that are going to help us thrive as things get more difficult and challenging. So I'm hoping that part of why I do this with you, Polly, is I want to bring this to more people. I want them to learn about how they can be a force for change in their family, in their community, in their friend groups, in their social groups. Take it offline, bring it into the real world, break bread with people, have coffee with strangers, talk to that person next to you that you may see every day, but you don't know anything about them. Take the risk, ask them a question, talk to them.
And that's why waking up is not enough.
Yes.
That waking up, though, in order to bring it into the breaking of bread and so on, it requires being able to have respectful conflict, to be interested in people who think and feel differently. And that is the awakened path. That is the path. That's what we were talking about in the 10 Oxherding pictures. It goes back to talking to people. You don't go out and just meditate in a cave.
That's how you make a difference, and that's how you bring it into the world, and that's how you live it. Live it by interacting and connecting. And connecting, you never know who you're going to meet, who that person, that stranger is who sits next to you. So take a chance, reach
Take,
out.
take a chance and don't talk about people behind their backs. Just talk to the people. It's tolerable, it's bearable, you learn something. And thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Polly. I appreciate it, as
Thank you.
always.
Yes.
Enjoyed this episode of Waking Up Is Not Enough, Flourishing in the Human Space? Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss an episode of insightful discussions and explorations into the human psyche. Share this episode with friends and family to spread the journey of self-awareness and critical thinking. Together, let's challenge the norms, embrace empathy, and flourish in our unique paths. Your support means the world to us and our growing community. Share your comments in the thoughts below. We love hearing from you.